I got up this morning at just about 12 o'clock, moved me some washing machine, came home to dinner, ate some surplus peanut butter, listened to the children scream. Listened to the children scream. You know the government done closed down the good old prairie, made set my chickens free. Just the other morning I sold people and they stomped off my apple tree. Yeah, you know they stomped off my apple tree.
Welcome to another Day of Remembrance, sponsored by the Whitefield Historical Society. We're happy to have you all here to remember Whitefield's Back to the Landers. Whitefield's population has nearly doubled since the 1970s, mostly as a result of many young people seeking reasonably priced land and homes in order to go back to the land. Some were called hippies or from away or maybe back to the landers. Over the years since, those names have faded and the young people, not so young anymore, are part of the fabric that make up a rural community in Maine. Many have joined committees, volunteered for projects, and have become leaders. Their immigration to Whitefield is second only in size to the one back in the 1800s when the Irish came to plant our fertile river valley. Now the Back to the Landers are part of our history. They have a story to tell. That's why we chose this subject for this year's Day of Remembrance. What better way to hear their story than to interview a few of them today? So we have with us John and Judy Robbins, Jerry and Judy Mulderman, Peter Froelich, Theda Torbett, Jimmy Sillen, and Frank Ober. Bill will ask them a few questions, and if there's time, those in the audience may do the same.
This is a story of Whitefield's young people who came in the late 60s and 70s, and really the end of it is how did that change Whitefield? So that's kind of the way it led me. We'll start over here, John and Judy, and you guys can fight over who wants to answer, because you're together as a couple and have many things in common, and maybe some things not in common. So anyway, so you're from away. Where did you come from?
Well, first off, I'm surprised to be historic. I kind of question about how away I'm from, because as an infant I summered on the West Alna Road in a cape that my father rebuilt. And Father and Joe Barth were classmates in divinity school and summered up here from the time, as I say, I was an infant on, and they worked together, collaborated, and rebuilt old houses. There were a lot of them falling down there in the 40s. So when I married in 1967, I had a literate wife who filled out the application forms for a job at the Wiscasset High School, and we moved up here on the Hollywood Road for a couple of years. Found an old cape that was falling down. $1,500 for a cape and 2.5 acres. The guy was going to bulldoze it. Anyway, while we were living down there, we started keeping animals. We had a milk cow and pigs and chickens and children. And in order of importance. And we started to hear about the Whitefield hippies were arriving, the Whitefield hippies. And we finally got to meet Joe Rosenthal, and he came down with Rob Johansson to borrow my hydraulic floor jack. It was a kind of thing going on then when, and it was with rebuilding that old house that people would gather together and swap off work. And Fred Fagan practically plumbed my house, and others helped wire it and so on. So I I think Judy could tell you why we left that old house.
I just, John just said others helped wire it, and you want to feel terror. The first night, you know, the switch was flipped, you know, oh my God, you know. It was all pretty amateur, you know. Why did we come out here? Harriet's introduction, whoever was responsible for writing that was, it was really good because it covered all the bases. And that you mentioned the economic issue. Finding a place that we could afford, finding land we could afford, was a big part of it. And I won't go into the spiritual thing.
I think that your February experience in the solar house there.
Oh yeah, I forgot all about that. Okay, I will tell you. George Hervishon, who lives over in Newcastle and who builds houses. I was visiting at their shed roof house. He had gone to the Shelter Institute in Bath, never having brought him in contact with Neil before. Learned how to build a house and built a house. So I was visiting over there. Indeed, it was February, and there was a bit of a fire in the stove, just mostly embers. And George was in shirt sleeves, and you know, it was warm in the house. I hadn't been warm since I came to Maine. And you know, double wool socks and lined, you know, jeans with the long underwear, the layers up here, but still cold. And I thought, this is like a miracle. You know, what's going on here? And so it was a passive solar house. And, you know, 6 inches in the walls and 12 inches overhead. And this is for us. So that was my, you know, I couldn't believe it. Why are we, you know, something didn't compute. Why are we living in this house freezing with we had converted one of the fireplaces, you know, again, so it could accommodate a stove. The romance went out of, you know, all the fireplaces after that first winter, I want to tell you. And, you know, the kids had strep all the time, and, you know, everybody's sick. And here we are in this house, and it was like, oh, you know, Palm Beach. So that was something I remembered. Okay, shoot, yes.
Yeah, Judy, I think, you know, that little illustration shows how things change over time, too.
Yes.
With how you started and what it's like now. Jimmy, where did you come from before Whitefield, Jimmy?
I was living the life of an artistic dropout in the greater Boston area. I lived in Roxbury and then in Cambridge, and moved up here from Cambridge. I found a very cheap piece of land way up and back. I had no idea what Whitefield was, but it was a lot of land. It was cheap, and so I bought it. And then the house that I'm living in right now came up for sale, and I bought that too. $12,500, a house in 40 acres. And,
Wow.
And this was 1968 or 69. I finally moved up here myself in 1971.
And after you were here for a while, Jimmy, what was your opinion about being here? As opposed to
just well, I like being kind of here by myself to do my own thing with people I was close to, and I tried to interact pretty minimally back in them days.
and that's still the case, right?
Not quite so much.
Thanks, Jimmy. Same here, a couple together, so we'll let you fight over the mic. But
We don't fight.
we'd like to know where you came from before Whitefield, and why you picked Whitefield in particular as opposed to anywhere else in Maine.
we had been searching for a property. We lived in the big city. We were in Gardner at that time. And I was born and raised in the country in the southwestern corner of Pennsylvania. We were actually closer to Morgantown, West Virginia. There are a couple hills down in that area, in case you want to know. The main things that were, either you were a coal miner or you were a steel worker. And my father told us all when we were kids growing up, if you can find anything and make half the money, don't go into coal mines. I had two brothers that both had black lung. My oldest brother passed away from an accident in the coal mine. My younger brother right now is on a lung heart transplant list. So I feel well that we're here.
Yeah.
And Judy is
City slicker.
City Slicker. Good to say.
Yeah, I was born in Providence, Rhode Island, and then I lived up north, up near the Bangor area for a few years, but I was very young, so I don't remember any part of that. And then we moved to Gardner, and I call myself a city slicker because I never lived really in the country with like an outhouse and no running water or any of that stuff. So he used to ride a motorcycle, a Norton 750, which back in the early 70s, that was not anything anybody wanted in their neighborhood. But he used to ride out through the country roads, and he came out through Whitefield. And he saw the house, which now belongs to Lucy and Herb. And Lillian Cheney owned the house next door, and it was empty. Neota Grady lived where Herb and Lucy lived. And he liked that old house. He thought it looked nice and it was empty, so make a long story short, he checked around, see who owned it. And Lillian didn't live in the house at the time. She lived in another, up north somewhere, I think. And so we got in touch with her and told her we wanted to buy the house. And so she asked us what we were going to do with it. Were we going to flip it, you know, fix it up and sell it? We said no. We had 2 young kids at the time, and so we bought it like the rest of them. We bought it for a very cheap price. And it did need some work, but it was livable. It had an outhouse attached between the house and the barn. And I thought, you know, I don't think I can do this. And the water was, you go to the well and you bring it up. And we had 2 little kids. But we moved in, and we had a coal stove, I think it was in the beginning. And I tried it for a little while, and then I went back home one day and told my mother, I said, me and the kids are moving back. She said, no, you're not. She said, you married him, and you need to be married.
I've heard.
It's like, kind of like, you got yourself into this mess, you'll get yourself out. And she said, you can come back and visit, but you are going back there to live. And I do thank my mother that she did send me back home where I belong, because we did survive it. And a cute story is we had one of Jerry's brothers and his wife and their 2 little kids. They wanted to come to Maine and see where we live, because we said we bought this neat old farmhouse. And so they came, and I remember Jerry's sister-in-law, her name's Vicky, she came in and she's looking around at the house and, you know, how we heat and no bathroom and no running water and 2 little kids. And she said, oh, you must just spend the weekends here. I said, no, this is home. And she said, you mean you stay here during the day and the night, you don't go back to town? I said, no, but, you know, that was the beginning. And I'm really grateful for Whitefield. I really am. It got us involved in a lot of different things.
Can I say a couple other words? After we had been here for about 2 years, I said, would you move back to Gardner? And she said, no way. I mean, at first, I mean, she did not want to be here.
Well, I'm glad you answered that question, because that's on my list. Really, you know, after a few years, what was your opinion here? So the interesting thing I think about what you folks had to say is you know, I've interviewed others, and we have people from Massachusetts and New York City and Boston area. And so you might say they were city slickers, but to hear someone from the hills of Pennsylvania, that kind of adds a whole new twist to it, really. Frank, where are you from?
Maine.
So how did you get to Whitefield?
By car.
Okay. Sounds like a Bert and I story.
No, it reminds me of a story, I've forgotten people's names, but they called somebody up on the red phone, asked someone to come over and help them out with a problem. Well, how do I get there?
Yeah.
Well, that little red truck. I grew up in a small town down in Washington County, Baileyville these days, the village of Woodland, and I believe the population's about the same as Whitefield, except we had a village. I left there to go live in Manhattan, going to school for 3 years, and then moved to Staten Island, which is sort of like moving from Bangor to Whitefield, because Staten Island was rural in those days. There were built-up areas, but it was mostly rural. And after 3 years of that, I decided I'd had enough of the big city, and pulled up stakes and moved up here to Maine, and moved into the big city of Augusta for a few months, a year or so, and found a lovely lady, and we both worked at Togus. So our thing was, I don't want to live on that side of the river, I don't want to live upriver, so I have to travel through Augusta. I want to live this side of the river and get to Togus without going through built-up areas. And Whitefield was one of the places we could look. Chase was a realtor, and he showed me several pieces of land, one of which is on the Divine Road, which when we have a wet year is underwater.
Thanks, Frank.
Enough.
That's great. One thing I think that people will be interested in is how reaction of you folks as to after being here a while. Did it meet your wants and ideas of how it ought to be? So.
Well, ignoring your question, Bill, I did want to pick up. Judy said the thing to do was build a solar house and be warm, and so we put our old Cape up for sale and sold it, and we were still looking for property and found a place in Ulm of 25 acres for $25,000, and we were really close to closing on that when through a story that's too long to tell, we found this place for sale where the harvest festivals had been held regularly, and up on the end of what was Benner Road at the time. And we went up there one September night after school, after Judy spotted it in the paper, and closed on it, dropped $200 on Lincoln Orf, and bought what we could only guess was the boundaries of 120 acres for $29,500. So instead of 25 acres at $25,000, we got 120 at $29,000. But we didn't have a house, and we got a solar hole put in, and our contractor let us down. We wound up spending the winter that year in that's 77, right?
Winter 77.
77 in the cellar hole with no water, no electricity, no telephone, no road, and 4 children.
One in diapers.
So that we recreated the homesteading thing, and 3 head of cattle and a brood sow too. Anyway, that following, late that winter and into the spring, we built a house. We found an excellent electrician in town.
Oh, yes, who could that be?
And got to know Ray Weeks, who put in the septic system, and was also our abattoir and a cattle carer. But as far as, well, Ray is an example, and I think it's true of the other people who were back to the landing, if that's what we were doing. The people who were not from away, who were here, I think were very accepting of those who saw of those of us who were integrating in the community. Our kids went to school. I think that hard work was appreciated by those who were here and saw that the people who were coming in were not taking over Whitefield, but participating in it, in the traditions of the rural community.
What about the 52 intellectuals?
52?
I don't recall any intellectuals.
Referring to the main Times article, right?
To Pug Chase's remarks about it.
I don't want to pass the microphone on without two anecdotes. Okay.
Yeah.
It was so cold. How cold was it that first winter? Well, big snow. The winter of 77, 78. A lot. Big snow, deep. Craig Froxford, we were living in a cellar. Craig Froxford was driving the school bus, and he had to carry the Rachie, who was in kindergarten at the time, over the snow, over the snowbanks to get down into our bunker. Oh, I'm going to add number 3. Kids in kindergarten, is Natasha here?
Yes.
Okay. Kids in kindergarten had to draw a picture of their home.
Yeah.
So she brought home that picture, and it looked like, it was a box, with a chimney coming out the top and smoke, in snow. And that's just what it was.
So walkout cellar and covered over flat.
And in that walkout cellar, this is one of the anecdotes, Mary Olson came down to visit. Because she was the public health nurse, and word had spread that there's a family living up there, in the ground. And so she came in, and she had she was a woman of steel, but a merciful heart, and she looked around, and she wasn't dissatisfied with what she saw. And so she sat down there. We had this big Ashley stove. And we sat around the stove for however long visiting, and it was warm right around the Ashley. Anyway, that was one thing. Mary's appearance, we talked about that years later. Why did you come down? Oh, I see. December 6th, 1977, as the winter was setting in, we had, 5 head of cattle who were over across the road behind our wire. The snow was coming down. John and I were putting the finishing touches, i.e. a roof, on their
Cattle shed.
mini barn, and oh my God, it was cold. And mittens wouldn't do it, and we had wool socks on our hands, and pounding in the last nails, trying to keep a sense of humor. And we could see the cattle standing on tiptoe, watching what was going on. They were all at the fence. And anyway, it was such a joy that night to lead them in. And we finished up about 10 o'clock at night, getting that.
I know, but this can't go untold. In that cellar, we had 4 weather systems. Right near the stove was the desert system, and when we moved in there, it was green concrete. It was still, anyway, the floor around the stove began to lighten up, and it was the arid area. And you get away from the stove a little bit, and because there's no insulation on the deck, the condensation began to form on the ceiling and drip down. And further on down, it began to freeze. And when you got down to where the stove was, the range, the frost crystallized and began to fall. So we had desert, we had tropical, we had the temperate area, and we had the Arctic area.
Thank you. Well, Jimmy, so you looking back on it,
Yeah.
how would you do it any differently?
I don't even know where to start. So, I might not say anything. But after a few years, I began to realize that people around here were more accepting than I expected them to be.
Yeah.
And that was a good thing. Ray Weeks was one of my favorite people too. Knock him on the head, do the world a favor, as he used to say. Among other kind of stuff. Yeah. You're keeping it.
Yeah. Good. So you wouldn't have done it much differently? You'd done it all over again?
I think so, yeah.
That's great. Now, John and Judy, I'm sorry, Jerry, John and Judy. Yeah, I'll get to that. You folks had children, and I'd like to know how they liked it here, and whether they would choose to stay or go.
Actually, our youngest son, he moved out of town. The backside of his property line is on the Jewett Road in Pittston, and his property line is Whitefield, Pittston. So he moved way out of town. Our other two children, our oldest son has property in Wiscasset and property in Jackman. He lobsters and stuff on weekends. He has his license, and clams and fishes out of Wiscasset. And then he works in the woods during the week in Jackman.
Wow.
He says he wants to move to Jackman permanently because you have to come all the way down to Skowhegan to find his stoplight. We're too built up for him.
So maybe someday with somebody interviewing him why he came from Whitefield to Jackman.
I just want to add one thing. We also have a daughter. And I remember, she would not appreciate being forgotten. And she always loved Whitefield. And when we were younger and we first moved to town, we got involved with the fire department and with the union hall, and I ran for town office and stuff. So our kids always had a lot of exposure to the town people and stuff. And our daughter, for all of the events that we have down at the Union Hall, and we've had with the fire department and all the different associations, she's always come back to spend time with that.
It reminds me of 4th of July when so many of the children come back and won't miss the 4th of July. How about your children, Frank?
Well, probably most of you know my daughter lives here in town, and she sort of emulates what we tried to do. She's a farmer, and she likes that term. My son Abe lives with his mother, and I honestly don't know much. And my other son lives down in New York State, and I know even less.
John and Judy, the children, did they like it here? Are they still here, or did they go?
You want to take that? All the kids are in state. Hannah is up on MDI, and she loves Maine, and she comes back. I mean, she loves Whitefield. She was a third grader when we came out here. Patrick.
But you might mention the chickens.
Chickens, there. That's why I mentioned them.
Okay.
Patrick lives down in Sheepscot. Rachel lives in Augusta, and they're both writers, and they do other things. And Josh is a musician.
Yeah, yeah.
Plays with Jimmy Sillett.
Been known to anyway.
He is at the Wharf, if any of you are interested, at least there on Sunday nights.
Yeah.
Open mic.
Yeah. Always go with that.
Yep. And we have 2 grandchildren, Ezra, 21, and this, I should mention this town came forward for Ezra when he was very badly injured 3 years ago now. And it was a, I don't want to say breathtaking, that sounds a little dramatic, but I was, as his grandmother, I was incredibly grateful to Whitefield. And it just came up, and anyway, thank you publicly for that. He's 21 and Henry is 2.
Frank, how do you think Whitefield's changed since the arrival of the young people?
It's a lot different. I was involved in the fire department way back, and a lot of resistance to spending money on providing fire protection by the taxpayer. And I just recently was looking through some notes printed in the paper, I think that Lucy wrote, and the comment at that time was that they bought a fire truck. And Jay Hall was the one that said it, though it wasn't given him credit in the newspaper article. He said, this town has changed a lot. And I think from that moment on, I'm very proud to have been part of what's happened with the town government here in Whitefield. Between building that building next door, buying, equipment that's designed to do what it does best, fight fires, and support the fire crew that does that. So, but I've also seen a lot of other things change, that have been good. We got a nice parking lot next door, and you got some nice steps built by volunteers. There's a lot of volunteer stuff down here, and that really makes me proud to be part of it, but I also recognize that there's other people doing a lot more than I am, and that's wonderful.
Same question. How do you think it's changed?
I think the main thing is when I ride up and down the roads in town, I say, this house was here when I got here? This one wasn't, this one wasn't, this one wasn't, this one was.
Yeah, 3 to 1 is about where it is.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's amazing. The population hasn't changed. It has changed, but not to the extent when you look at percentage-wise compared to the houses. I can't complain about all the new houses because a lot of them have given me my living. That's true. Yeah. I'm sure that I've done work for more than one of you here.
I think the change for me that I've seen, because I was in the town office for quite a few years, when we first moved to town and I was elected, I did all the town business out of my home. And you don't see that anywhere else. In fact, I'm not sure if there are anymore unless maybe you go further up north, because there was, the town office for Whitefield was at my home, and over in Windsor was Laura Gray. And I know Laura Gray's not doing it anymore in her home, they've gone. But to me, that's a tremendous change, because it went from the home and then we had an office in the school. That still was rather unique, and now the whole process is different. And we didn't have electronics. I had a manual typewriter to do every single thing. It was pencil and paper, no adding machines. And I think the piece that I feel we've lost is the closer connection with the people, because when they came to my home, usually it was like a mom and she brought all the kids. She had no choice. So we got to have coffee and chat and all of that. I got to know the people a lot more than I think the girls that work in the town office have that opportunity now. And even when we went up to the school, everybody's children were in the same school. My kids were there, so I didn't have to have a babysitter once they hit school. I had the Whitefield school system to do it for me. And if anything went wrong with my kids, I was in the building. I could take care of it, and they knew it. But it still afforded me the opportunity where I could get to know each of the people when they came in, because we could sit and actually talk to those people and stuff now. That's the piece I think we've lost. But if I had to change anything for myself, I wish I would have moved to Whitefield sooner.
We're the others. Can't do any better than that.
Yes.
Could I make one comment on that? One of the questions when people would meet you, friends in town and stuff, and they say, well, what do you have for a house out there? I always said, well, we have 6 rooms and 2 paths.
Yeah.
That's paths, not baths.
Yeah.
One to the outhouse, one to the well.
So, John and Judy, what things did you expect that you did not find in Whitefield?
Well, not to answer your question, Bill. I would like to talk about change. There was a long period, many years, when you drive around Whitefield and you'd see barn after barn going down. There were numerous dairy farms here when we got here, and they closed one after another after another. My road, on the other hand, when we negotiated the power line with CMP, no sooner did we get power down almost a mile into the dirt road with no power, 12 more houses came in. I sometimes facetiously say we probably have flamingos on the lawns nearby, but that characteristic of the road is being the end of the world sort of thing when we first moved out there is now suburbia. But since the demise of dairy farms that I talked about, there has been a notable resurgence. And I think that the Shipscut General is something that we should all be very grateful to. It is now a community center. The only other community centers that we really had were the stores and the schools. And now there's a place where people gather, and there is a new spirit in town. Agriculture is reigniting, and the fields are no longer going back, and barns are being built instead of being torn down.
Judy, on that note, what advice would you give the young people, many of them young farmers, and maybe back the landers even now, what advice would you give to them?
Just to be community, I guess. Look people in the eye. And when someone knows they're dealing with another person, there's communication. Just communicate. And I see, in this room, and it's been the case since we've been here, people, what Frank was saying about volunteers, so many people are ready to give what they have to the town, what services. Everybody's gifted. And just to offer your gift or your gifts, however you can do that. Oops.
To the young farmers, I would say, don't quit your day job.
Well, Jimmy, you probably met some of the younger people that are musicians and so forth. A couple of them, yeah. And how has the music changed since the late '60s?
That's all the same.
That's another question. I usually go in Hallowell and stuff, and I see people playing there all the time, and I'm more part of that scene. I see the Oshima brothers are still active, and
Chris Simpson,
yeah, Chris, and
Birdie, yeah.
who?
Birdie Pole.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
that's who I meant to mention. Bird and them. Yeah, they're still going at it. So there didn't seem to be any of the Whitefield native types back in the day who were musicians, and now there's a bunch of them. Some of whom came in, but they're second generation people. They're all Whitefield. We're all in Whitefield now.
That's exactly, you answered it exactly. That was exactly what I think people would like to hear. Jerry and Judy, what things did you, what did you expect to find here that you never did find?
I think, you know, like I said, when I was in Pennsylvania, I was definitely in the country, and that's what was here, and I did find it. Like I said, I was so happy to move out of Gardner. I mean, that was the one thing when I came out here, I told all my friends, I mean, we lived in a mobile home, a fairly new one in Gardner, and I said, it's gonna take 10 years for my taxes to get to where I was when I left Gardner. And I was totally wrong. It only took 9 years.
I didn't really have any expectations when I came here. I didn't know what to expect. I certainly didn't expect the house we lived in. And my kids always joke, our kids always joke, and they say, well, we did survive, Mama, we're all still alive, and we produced more kids, so that's good. The only thing I would say maybe for people that are here, the young ones, I hope they stay. And I'm going to make a little bit of a pitch for volunteerism is, I know for Jerry and I, and me especially, I've really enjoyed the volunteer part, and I would encourage everybody. Like Judy said, we all have a gift, but I think the biggest gift that all of us have, the young ones, the middle-aged, the older ones like us, we have some time. We don't have to devote 40 hours a week to help all the different organizations there on time, but I think if people would look at it from the point of view that, you know, I have a couple hours, I can help somebody. You know, call the organization and find out. And I can use the Union Hall as an example. We only put on 3 or 4 functions a year. And a lot of people think, well, I can't come and help because I can't be there for 4 hours during your supper or something. But you could come for an hour and wash dishes and go. That hour means an awful lot. And even like the Historical Society and the Grange up here and all the other organizations, an hour here and an hour there. It's tremendous, the difference that it can make for those organizations. And for the organizations to survive and keep going, we need that volunteer help. We all do.
Thanks. I have a feeling that there's some questions out in the audience that some people would like to ask.
Had a job. We came from Massachusetts, and Gene had a job. We moved here in '81, so we put a tack in Augusta and drew a 25-mile radius, and we drove around and around and around. And we looked at the river here, and it was really nice. So we followed the river all the way up, and there was no industry on it. And we liked the farms, and we were thinking, where do we want to bring our children up? And we just fell into this place and have been in love with it ever since.
Just turned the mic off. Didn't mean to scare you. What do you?
Well,
what would you like to ask?
John just said, don't give up your day job. And I think there was a lot of stress amongst a lot of the couples that came here originally trying to maintain that back to the land lifestyle. Some of them ended up splitting up. And what did you mean by that? Don't give up your day job.
There was a time that I was a member of the Kennebec Valley Growers Co-op, 1980, 82, and there were 8, 10 farmers who formed a co-op and built a storage facility, and we had a farm stand in Augusta for a while. And the only money that anybody made in that organization was people we hired to wash the carrots. Agriculture is really a hard business, and the supermarkets were very difficult to get into. The required wax cartons cost more than the cabbages we were putting into them. It was good for us for feeding the family. We had food from the table day after day that came off the place, and we were able to pay the taxes with a couple of head of beeves every fall, but it wasn't something you could make a living at that I could see.
So,
I have a question, John and Julie. What do you think the difference is between the new generation of farmers that we're seeing now and you guys? What's the difference? What do you all think the difference is?
I don't think there's a whole lot of difference, actually. I can't speak definitively because I don't know enough people well enough to speak definitively, but my impression is that, these kids is what I would say, they're ambitious in the best way. They're ambitious to take care of themselves and to contribute to community. What I see building up is just phenomenal. But I don't know them individually well enough to comment beyond that.
I have a sense that there's a basic idealism with the newer generations that are coming up, that they're making a statement by what they were doing. For me, it was a way of living, but it wasn't a statement.
yeah.
It almost seems as though, that it is a statement in talking about things that were a little bit different from the 60s and the 70s, in that I don't want to say more dedicated, but people are a little bit more focused, and there certainly is there's probably a lot more education in that type of area where they're really interested in what they're putting on their table. I'm not saying that you guys weren't interested in that, but it almost seems like it was more of a culture in the 60s, and to go back to the land, to get back, to not do what our parents did and to do this other thing.
Well, to get very specific, when we came up to Maine on our honeymoon, I'd never been to Maine before. I grew up in Massachusetts, and it was like, oh my God, so different from Massachusetts. It was another world, and to be able to live here in this beautiful place that just was like beyond a dream, to be in this beautiful place day after day, to be able to see it, and that that's how I felt.
My observation has been that there's a little more money for these young people. I look back on my early days.
Yeah.
Man, I lived most of my life without running water, electricity, couldn't pay the taxes, lived in chicken coops, and didn't have any taxes. Moved in with my parents when Robin and I broke up, and I look at these kids, they're in their 20s. They got parents that have money that are helping them. It's wonderful. I mean, they're buying tractors. They're not hooking up their kids. There's an ease that I'm seeing, and I'm very glad of it. Very glad of it. But these kids have parents behind them and have a little money. And I think that makes it a lot easier. I don't see any of them living without electricity or running water.
It's called debt.
Okay, so we owe it all to debt.
Harriet?
Chuck and I used to, we didn't live in Whitefield at the time, but we were very active with MOFCA, and we used to go to all these different things, and Scott and Helen Nearing would be the speakers. And I don't think I ever recall Scott Nearing speaking where he didn't at some point say, "Pay as you go."
Yeah. And so you didn't have much.
Right.
Because you didn't have much money.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was wondering if Jerry could talk a little bit about Walter's Smokehouse, because that was a big deal when we moved to the farm.
Yeah, you'll know something about that.
There was a lot of things smoked at the smokehouse.
That's enough. You said it all.
Smoked it all.
Yeah, it was, he had a really good business going. But there again, after the business burnt, it became more and more federal regulated. To reopen, he had to put in 2 bathrooms, one for ladies, one for gentlemen.
The smokers?
Yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's amazing. So, you know, anytime you have a commercial business and you're selling any products, because he was also selling product there, you know, like smoked salmon. Yeah, he made his own sausage. He said smoked salmon, turkeys, of course the typical hams and bacons, and but you know, people brought their product in that they wanted smoked. That was different. But you know, when you start and you become a commercial where you're selling other things, you know, that you're producing yourself, and yeah, and we also, at that time, you know, we did the Common Ground Fair when it was out to Litchfield. Yeah, Litchfield first, I think, and then we went to Windsor. But in Litchfield, we would do that, and at that time, you know, I was good friends and stuff, so we went down to Greenpoint Farms, and I went to the winery in Gardner, and I picked up a couple barrels every year, and then I would take them down to Greenpoint Farms, and they would fill them full of cider right off the press, and I would take them to the fair. Yeah. So, anything else you want on that?
When we moved here in '80, it burned down like 3 months later, and I only was in it like twice, you know, and it was a big deal.
Yeah.
You could always see people going there and stopping.
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time there.
Where was it? Where was it?
Opposite his house.
It's just opposite of the house where, you know, the hospital was, the town hospital.
Where Pagurko is.
Right across from where the towers headed. Pagurko.
Yeah, a lot of us worked there.
Any more questions? Yes.
Just got one comment. We farmed down on the coast in Booth Bay, and there really wasn't much of a support system down there, but you know, thinking about Ray Weeks and the smokehouse, we'd bring our pigs up to Ray Weeks. He would slaughter them and take them across the, you know, we'd pick up the fresh meat, but everything that was going to get smoked, he'd take over to Walder, and then we could come and pick up our smoked goods there. And I also, back then, was doing business with Chase Farm Equipment. And so we bought some tractors and had some equipment done in Whitefield. So this was really a place where it was, even back then, it was kind of a hub and a center for small-scale agriculture.
Natasha?
Were any of you part of the food co-op?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I was in that. Well, I don't remember much about it. We did did a couple of distributions at our house and other people's different houses, and you could get some really, they had quite a selection of grains and cheeses, and for a while there, we used to look forward to those distribution days. Were you on that?
No, I wasn't.
No?
Frank was? Yeah.
You were, yeah, and I know Art and Natasha were back in the day.
Did George?
Yeah, one thing I remember fondly from those days was the USDA surplus food.
Yeah, I sang a song about that earlier.
Peanut butter, cheese,
Yeah,
spam.
yeah. Kids also dig that old Velveeta cheese, and the dog will eat the luncheon meat.
Spam?
Yeah, it was something along those lines, yeah.
Yeah, my mother, we used to do it at the Union Hall too.
Yep.
And my mother was, boy, she just loved those, it was community, working with food. I mean, what can be more close than that?
Yeah, Art, do you have another question?
Well, maybe Jimmy or somebody else could comment on the way socially integrated the kids that were here, the Morans and the Moonies and so forth, with the newcomers. And I think a lot of that had to do with the harvest parties and getting people together. And anybody wants to talk about that?
That was it. Yeah, the harvest parties were something else for a couple of years there.
So the harvest parties brought people together,
Yeah,
local people? and-
Local people and us back to the land. Well, we've been back for a while now.
And we have proof positive of those harvest parties on our property, a lot of melted glass bottles, mysteriously, underneath my herb garden.
When I plowed up the field, I would turn over small fireplaces and bricked-in outfits, but also out in the alder thicket, there were patches of open ground that had appeared to have been gardens at some time or another.
And Steve Schlosser was married on that property to Alice, remember Alice?
And Norman Chase was the officiator.
Yeah, when I first came to town, I called a lot of the old timers that were here, who were probably younger than us at that time. I called them the Whitefield characters, and they were. I mean, you know, we talked about Ray Weeks, Norman Chase, Pug. Pug. Now, when I first came to town, I got my four-wheel drive stuck in the field there, bringing in a load of coal. So I hooked another truck to it, and I got that stuck too. So I had a crawler, little John Deere crawler, and I go down and see Pug. Pug says, I said, I need some tracks for the crawler. He said, well, I got a track up at the old smokehouse where he smoked alewives. And I go down with my truck, and I'm trying to figure out how to get this thing loaded on the truck. And he says, don't worry about that. He said, you got a chain? And I said, yeah, I got a chain. So he takes his truck and he hooks the chain to his bumper, hooks the other end of it, and I know most of you who know what the track is off the crawler, by the time you take the whole thing and you take it off there, it's quite long. Yeah. And there goes Pug, right down through Kings Mills Village, about 40 miles an hour with that thing one side of the road to the other. Right through the village, up by the church, and up to my house. And try to do that today. Find somebody who can do that for you. But they were characters. I mean, you know, they would do anything for you. But they all had character.
Yeah, John.
Judy reminded me of a Ray Weeks story. I had a little piglet that got loose. It was later named him Gulliver. And he got away from me, and I didn't know anyway. I got a call from Ray Weeks. He said, they told me up at the store you're missing a pig. And I said, that's right. He says, well, I got one, came in and eating with my pigs. He said, the little gilt, is it? Female pig, those who know. I said, no, it's a show. He says, oh, all right, it's your pig.
I'll make it. I had a lot of fun. I think we all did.